I'd like to introduce Cheryl Beth now. So Cheryl Beth has, her name has been floating around the last few years from a number of people that have that I've been connecting with. Dave Griffith is one of them. He's presented at our forums in the past. He will also be presenting again in September. So Cheryl Beth has 30 years experience with strategic change initiatives. She's been coaching executives, doing a lot of leadership training. She has a background in chemical engineering from Lehigh, and then she has a master's in organizational dynamics, so she's a really nice left-right brain balance. So she's worked with lots of large companies in the past, like Procter & Gamble, where she worked with DuPont and GE and Amazon. And she's worked in lots of different settings. She's worked with Six Sigma, presented at Wharton, small business. I could go on, but I just want to share a few things from me. You're wise. You're not old. So I experienced Cheryl Beth. She's just very wholehearted. And she really cares deeply about family or businesses that she works with. And she and I actually have committed to be spiritual companions. I have a lot of respect for Cheryl Beth. In fact, she's one of my coaches. So Cheryl Beth, you can take it from here.
Cool.
And we're looking forward to it.
Sally. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. All right, I was going to say, let's flip it over and see what we can do here. Actually, that's Holy Cross. That's one of my retreat places. I think Sally mentioned that to you all. So if anybody's interested, it's an amazing Anglican monastery that's up on the banks of the Hudson. And I just got to spend Easter there, so I'm all rejuvenated and ready, maybe. We'll see. Okay, so let's do this. First of all, I'm very, very grateful to the Delaware Valley Family Business Center team for having me. Thank you to Sally and to Henry. It's been very, very fun. And Brenda behind the scenes. a special shout out, because she's been having to coordinate everything. So thank you very much. I also want to say thank you to all of you for taking the time to do the pre-work. Even if I know there were a few. Jonathan has already gotten his prize because he was first at getting his done. And there are a few more prizes up here as well. But I wanted to acknowledge him getting his 4 decisions assessment done. So thank you for that. I also want to do a big shout out to some of the folks from CEO Think Tank that are here today. Eileen, my amazing wing woman, one of my 2 wing women, the other one got COVID this week, again. So Eileen is taking the spot of 2 folks, and she's not only here to support me, but she is here to keep me focused, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So if you see her going like this on her watch, it's because I'm running over. You know that. I also want to say a big thank you. Michael Pearson, unfortunately, the founder and former CEO of Union Package, also got sick this morning. So he's in the process of getting tested. So I was hoping we could pull him in for like a little verbal, but I don't know if that's going to happen. So those are our 2, what do they call it in football? The injuries? The ones who've been sidelined, just like constant. But I wanted to give a big shout out to PPR Note, who's here, and actually Dave Van Horn, who's the outgoing CEO. is going to be doing a little understudy work for me today, and Chelsea, as well as the O'Connor Group. Marcia and I have known each other for 2 decades. It's sort of scary, going back a ways, and Keisha. So thank you for being here. So in order to stay focused, and so that you know a little bit about our work. So we have been in business, this year is actually our 26th year in business. We celebrated 25 last year. And over that time, we have worked with literally hundreds, I think, of CEOs and their team. I started, as Sally talked about, I started my career working with big companies. Initially with Procter & Gamble in manufacturing. I worked up at a really big paper plant up in northeastern Pennsylvania, Hoopany. And that was my plan. And you'll see there's a sort of ongoing theme. I'm starting to just say, this is my plan, God willing, right? And COVID cooperating. So we have collected things. My dad was an engineer, my mom was a librarian, and I got sort of the best and worst of both of them. And when I first started working with small companies about 20 years ago, a family business, Arbil, I got hooked. So I'd been working with the big guys with J&J and GE, and then I did this strategic planning gig with Arbil, and I fell in love with small mid-market companies. I was like, this is so cool. But I knew nothing about being a business person. I really didn't. I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I started my business when I had my eldest, who will be 27 next week. I wanted to work 4 days a week. The company I was working for wouldn't let me. And a friend of mine said, you know, you have this great experience, you could do consulting. Little did I know. It took about 10 years, but along the way, I consumed. So I'm a really, really big reader. I consumed, I collected, I curated, and basically I'm a business nerd at this point. So I'm a little dangerous, and that's part of the reason why we have this framework here. Because we could spend hours talking about all the ways that we could help you and how your businesses could grow and how you could learn. But for today, we are going to focus. We're going to focus on the 4 critical decisions that you need to make as business people using Scaling Up. And I am indebted to Vern Harnish, one of my advisors when I was inventing my own business process, because sort of chemies are process-oriented, if you know anything about chemical engineers. We're very process-oriented. I was inventing my own process. How do you do this? How do you grow a small company successfully? And one of my advisors said, well, don't reinvent the wheel. Vern already has all the intellectual property. And that was Mastering the Rockefeller Habits, which is how Michael Pearson actually grew his business, was using Mastering the Rockefeller Habits. And I read the book again, and I was like, here's the answers. Why reinvent the wheel? And one of the most important decisions, one of the most important tools in the Rockefeller Habits, in Scaling Up, is the 4 decisions. And so what we're going to be doing today is digging in. So the first piece we're going to do is looking at the assessment that you took, which is why we were nudging you to get the assessment done, because we wanted you to be able to talk about it. And I firmly believe that we can't talk about where you want to go until we figure out where you are, right? And also how aligned you are, which is why it was important for everybody on your team to take the assessment. And if there are people on your team that didn't take the assessment, or they're back at the office and they haven't, I'd highly encourage you to get a read on that too. It's not a completely objective assessment, but it's a good one to get the conversation going. So we're going to spend about 20 minutes digging into the assessment. And then we're going to divide the rest of the morning into those 4 decisions: people, strategy, execution, cash, and about 30 minutes in each one. So we're going to dig into people. We're going to talk about a couple of the questions that you should be asking yourself. I think Jim Collins is the one who said sometimes the questions are more important than the answers. And one of the best compliments I can get is when someone says, wow, that's a really good question. I hadn't thought about that. And then give you a tool to think about it. And then we're going to talk about strategy. And again, questions and a tool. And this group over here is going to get some more advanced work just to keep them a little occupied. But they're going to talk about their stories as well. Then we're going to take a break around 10 o'clock. And when we come back, that's when I was going to have Dave just share a few words about PPR Notes' story over the last decade. It has been a decade that we've been working together. And then we're going to get into execution and cash. And at the end, we're going to do a little bit of a wrap-up. But we have an offer for you since you showed up today. It's only good for the people that showed up, by the way. So I know there were a few people that signed up, but it's only if you showed up. There's an offer, and we have an opportunity, a couple opportunities, actually, in case you want to take advantage of them. And then just know that one of our sort of, what is it, Eileen, a signature? Is what's your key takeaway? What's the one thing that you're going to commit to doing when we're done today that you're going to take with you? There are handouts that we're going to be using, so each one of you should have handouts. And in that handout, you will notice on one page of that handout, there's actually a calendar. And the reason that's in there is as a reminder that you actually need to schedule things. If you want to actually get anything done, it has to show up in your calendar. That's our framework. So there's actually a schedule in here to make sure that you get your follow-up meeting. And Eileen, as I said, is going to help keep me aligned.
I just want to check if everyone hears Cheryl back.
Yeah.
Is she loud enough for y'all? Borderline. Okay, so project.
So, all right, so you want me to project more? Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right, signal me if I start dropping. Thank you. That's good, because I don't want to carry the mic around. All right, so let's do this. We are also, by the way, two additional things. We are also going to talk about the 3 barriers to success. So again, back to the whole being the daughter of a librarian. There's a lot of really great research out there that it doesn't necessarily give you a crystal ball, but it gives you a pretty good approximation of a crystal ball about what the barriers are. You're not the only one who's grown a business. And so let's talk about that. And again, if you know what's coming, you can better prepare for it, right? That's the whole idea, is preparation. And then at the end of your handouts, you will notice that there are resources. So again, we tried to limit the resources, but there are some recommended resources that you can check out in your spare time. All right? I think that's good, right? I covered everything? Voila. All right. Real quick, so I know that you're hearing me. So here's another thing to know, and this has been vitally, vitally, vitally important in this age of Zoom meetings and hybrid and having to work remotely and all that type of thing. How much do human beings actually hear? How much of what I just shared with you have you heard? What percent? 30? Less. 20. 20%, right? We only hear and see and take in about 20%. So if you think you've told somebody something and then you're shocked that they didn't hear you, that's not a surprise. So here's a quick question. What's one thing that you've heard? So Sally, I'm going to pick on you first. What's one thing that you just heard in this last sort of setup, 10 minutes? Just one.
That we're going to do those 4 things.
Yes. We're going to do those 4 things, and we're going to do the assessment. Yep. Jonathan, I'm picking on you. What's one thing you heard?
We're going to look at the barriers to growth.
Yes, we are going to look at the barriers to growth. And how about somebody in the back? All right, Tony.
There's a calendar because we got to plan things.
What gets planned gets done. I think that might be like a Stephen Covey thing. All right. So here's the deal. Historically, that we have found that there are 3 challenges, 3 areas where CEOs and their teams in the small mid-market space, because you're a unique breed, right, struggle the most. They struggle with profitability and maintaining profitability as they grow. And if you do any reading with Greg Crabtree, you will find out that there is a black hole of profitability that typically hits companies at around the 3 million mark. There's also another one that usually comes in at around the 15 million-ish or so. The second thing that they do is they have too many things to do. How many of you have 10 things on your to-do list? No, it's like I am 50. Right? 10 and over, right? And again, so I'm giving you some guide rails here. How many priorities can you have and realistically expect them to get done? 2 or 3. That is it, folks. 2 or 3. All right? When you start going above that, you run out of bandwidth. And the third area is accountability, the A word. All right? Getting people aligned and accountable to getting things done. And we've got some things for you on that one as well. And then, you throw in a worldwide pandemic and supply chain issues and rising inflation, and, it's just, actually, I had my strategic CFO conversation with I meet with him quarterly with Crabtree this past week. And the workshop that he came and did for us at the end of 2020 is on our website if you want to check it out. And he said, and he's in his 60s. And his comment to me was, this is completely unprecedented. The environmental issues, the marketing issues, all the issues that we're dealing with, in his opinion, are just unprecedented. So if you feel like you've been on a bit of a roller coaster or whatever, that is normal. That is a sanity check. And so how do you manage through that? How do you deal with those issues, right? The other issue, again, this is just business, is that as you grow, you add people. And human beings, while behavioral science has taught us a lot about how human beings work, thank heaven, right? Thank God. As you grow, you add complexity. So first it starts off at, and I'm looking at the small companies, right? You start off with 2 people and there's just 2 of you. And then you add a 3rd person, but that increases it. There's 6 different interactions that you have to have. And then you increase it to another person, right? And so as you increase the number of folks, you actually have an exponential effect when it comes to the complexity of a company. And again, thank heavens, there are people like James Fisher who back in 2003, 2004, and he studied 650 entrepreneurial companies, and he wrote a book called Navigating the Growth Curve. And you'll see the resource, it's called The 7 Stages of Growth. And what he actually found out was that there were 7 stages of growth, each with its own unique challenges based on the number of FTEs, full-time equivalents, that you have, number of people. Because people add complexity. It's not about revenue. It's not about geographic locations. It's about people. People is that critical factor. And so it actually gives you a bit of a crystal ball for predicting and dealing with the challenges, as well as what he calls a wind tunnel stage and a flood stage. And if you want more information on that, I'm happy to talk about that later. And what he identified, and HBR has also identified this, Vern talks a lot about that, is in chapter 2. So you all got copies of the Scaling Up book. I would tell you that in my world, I know this is like a reference manual. It gets sort of a bad rap. Mandatory reading for any entrepreneur that wants to be successful, any business owner that wants to be responsible to the people that they employ, because I know family businesses have that. Read chapters 1 and 2. Read chapters 1 and 2. 1 gives you an overview of the system, 2 talks about the barriers to growth. I'll get off my platform. There are 3 barriers to growth. The first is lack of leadership. Finding the right people and putting them in the right seats. That's critical. You can't do it. And again, I'm talking to the choir here, right? You're all like nodding your heads. This was one of the 2 big things that I got from Learning Goals when I was looking at the assessments were people and money. When I talk to you guys. So I have my people books, and I have my people books here, and I have my money book here. Lack of leadership. And this is the hard one because we care about people, right? We really care. We want to be compassionate leaders. If you have family businesses, you have family members that, there's questions sometimes. The second is scalable infrastructure, right? As you grow, you need to put in place the processes and systems in order to grow successfully. And those processes and systems, what got you to 50, as Marcia knows, is not going to get you to 100. You have to change it. You have to change it up numerous times. And then and investing in people and processes is expensive. And then finally, market dynamics. And so we always say market dynamics will either make you look brilliant or like you missed the boat. And then COVID comes along, and so you end up having this amazing little thing called the COVID bump. It's like pregnancy. It's like the pregnancy bump, there was a COVID bump, right? How many of you ended up with COVID bumps in your revenues because you were like in the right? You're not pregnant. Yeah, we work with, we just finished working, they graduated with EBU, which is, they actually make puzzles. You can check out their story on our website. They make puzzles and toys. They're woman-owned. Mia has been the CEO started the company. She also started the company when her children were small because she wanted to be able to spend time as a mom. And you know, when you're in lockdown, what better thing to do than do a jigsaw puzzle, right? They saw a 200, almost 200% growth during lockdown. It was crazy, right? Crazy growth. But that's not gonna, then the question becomes, how do you take advantage of it, fill your coffers with the money, and then keep sustaining it, right? That's the trick now. It's like, what can we keep, and what might we need to adjust? Just for those of you, wait, do we have the landscapers here? Any no, they didn't make it, right? But it's the same thing with snow, right? Landscaping has snow, right? So snow, sometimes it snows, sometimes it doesn't. So you have to treat it as like a COVID bump. You have to treat it as a special anomaly and then say, what might we do differently going forward? And then finally, we have the 4 decisions, because the 4 decisions really gives us this opportunity to dig in and figure out where we should focus. People, strategy, execution, cash. And the reason I love the 4 decisions model, I like anything that simplifies the complex. It's like the legs on a table. Typically what we find in a small mid-market company is that one of these legs, people, strategy, execution, cash, is short. And you can stick in the sugar packets right under the leg. And that's the one that helps to focus you. That ends up becoming the number 1 priority for you, the number 1 focus area. And then I will never tell you not to focus on the other ones as well, but being clear about what the number 1 goal is, what your primary focus is critical. So this is why we want to dig into the assessment. And just to real quick, I'm just going to throw this up. Each one of these 4 decisions has a measurement. So good execution has 3 disciplines. I think Stephen Covey said there were 4 disciplines of execution, but we use 3. The first is you got to know what your priorities are. Again, 2 to 3. The second is you have to be able to measure your progress. Have some type of key performance indicator. If you walked out on a football field and there were no lines, it would be hard. I'm not saying you couldn't play the game, but it would be challenging, right? There has to be some type of measurement to keep you focused. By the way, human beings are pressure pumped. So the other thing about good execution is there should be a date that is associated with it. And then you need to have some type of speed bump to keep you in line. So the KPIs that we look at, and we're going to go in and talk about these when we talk about each of the 4 decisions. For people, it's all about engagement. How many of you are doing anything with like the Gallup work, or do engagement surveys, or do 15-5? Okay, right? So engagement is critical. There's lots of data that says if you have an engaged workforce, it improves productivity. It's crazy, right? The numbers, which this is why this is required reading for all of my CEOs right now. Strategy is all about revenue growth, and not revenue, not top line. What's the real mark of a good strategy? Revenue is vanity, and do you know that the fill in the blank? Blank is sanity. Profit, gross profit. Gross profit is your real top line, not revenue. Doesn't do you any good to have 10 million in revenue if it takes you 11 million to make it, right? Execution is all about profitability and giving yourself time back. By the way, that on the assessment was the big low one that most of you are struggling based on your assessment data. Most of you are struggling to find time, right? And then finally, cash. You can have all 3 of these correct, and it doesn't really matter. Because if you run out of cash, if you run out of oxygen, you're screwed. That's what happened during the last recession. This one, the government gave us PPP. So many of you probably have really strong balance sheets right now. I'm just curious about your cash forecasting capability. And again, you can go online, you can take the assessment online, you can download it, you can copy, paste, all that. It's in your, it's the first, I believe it's the first page in your handout, is the assessment. Am I right? Yeah, it's on the back of the page. All right, so let's take a look at your assessments and dig in and find out where you are. So, okay, so here's the secret. If you look, and this is the part that might require a little mental math, so for those of you that aren't morning people, I'm just giving you a heads up. If you look at the way the questions are lined up on the assessment on the website, she's already got it. She's like, yes. If you look at the website and if you look at the handouts, they don't match up to what I'm going to show you in terms of the order. All right, so on the website, we mixed it up because we didn't want you to, know the answers, right? So we mixed up the questions a little bit. But what I'd like to do is know where you are, right? So if you take a look at your assessment, can you add up all of your, so that, again, the rankings were, there was one person who ranked, I didn't know if you got the scale wrong. So one is that you strongly disagree with a statement. So 1 basically means you're not doing well in that area. And 5 is I'm doing really, really well. I strongly agree. So I just want to make sure that everybody's on that same page. And what I want you to do is take a shot at adding up and finding out what your scores are. And in a general sense, I'm just going to give you sort of the report card. In our world, this 4D assessment is actually a slimmed down version of a more extensive 4D assessment. This sort of gives us like a temperature check. So if you ended up getting 40 to 50, so how many people just individually got around a 40 to 50? We had one back here. Any 40s or 50s? Where? Oh, look at you guys. Well done. A, or at least a B plus. Was it closer to 40 or closer to 50?
Right in the middle.
Right in the middle, 45. All right, A minus. Good job. All right. So, you don't have to do anything if you don't want. You guys can go home. Wait, what company are you guys?
Laboratory testing.
You're the lab testing. That's right, I remember. Okay. How many people got 30 to 40 in the sort of B? Yeah, Chelsea was very hard on herself in the B range. I was looking at her assessment. Yes? Yeah, a few of you. Okay. So there's some room for improvement. Let's talk about how we can maybe help you. And then finally, who had 30 or less? All right, there's a bunch. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. I'm going to have to do something special for you. The 5 of you get to come up and pick a book at break, all right? Because I want you to learn. I want you to learn. I want you to grow. In my world, that's one of the best ways to do it. So we'll talk, the 5 of you. Now, what I'd like you to do is talk amongst yourselves. So let's take 4 minutes and compare your answers. Because this was just the first part. Now we got to see how aligned you are. Where did you agree? Where are you aligned? And where is there a difference? Before I give you the other answers. 4 minutes. So the first step is agreeing on where you are. Right? Yes. Because we can't decide if we want to go to Colorado, but we think Tony thinks we're in New Jersey, and Dave thinks we're in South Carolina, and Mark thinks we're already there. It's a problem. So how'd you do? How aligned-ish are you? Yeah, generally plus or minus-ish, 1 or so. Sally was saying they're pretty aligned. All right. And anybody wildly unaligned? Wow. That's good. That's good. No. No, that's good. Chelsea, you and Dave are still aligned? Yeah. Okay. Marcia, how about you and Megan?
We can have the same number, but the different numbers inside.
Ah, yes. You're going through that.
Why are you with 3 now?
Why are you a 3? Why am I a 5? Okay, good. So that's lovely. Is there anybody, because you don't have everybody here, I'm assuming, is there anybody back at the office who needs to be a part of this conversation? Okay, so you will notice in your handouts that there's also, along with a little lovely calendar, there's also this WWW execution thing in brown towards the back. If that would be important coming out of this conversation to go back home and talk to that person and see where they are so that you're all on the same page, put it down. And the reason we do this, right, is who is going to do that? What are they going to do? I'm going to go talk to Bill, or I'm going to go talk to Lucy, or whatever, right? By when? So today, just in case you didn't know, is Wednesday, April 27th. May starts next week. I would highly encourage you to do that within a 7-day period. In fact, who does EOS? I know Marcia does EOS. Anybody else an EOS person? Yeah, right? So what does Gino say on the level 10 meetings? When you have your 7-day to-do list, it has to be to done. At the end of 7 days, right? So make it days and weeks. Days and weeks are much better motivators. So put it down on your next step, because we're going to go back to that at the beginning, at the end today. So now let's talk about what questions are what. So here's your 3 strategy questions. And again, remember, strategy is measured by consistent, predictable, robust, real top-line growth, gross profit. We have a clear sense of our key differentiators. And we win deals more often than we lose. A number of you, by the way, actually scored that one high, which I found sort of interesting. We have a clearly articulated vision. Big, hairy, audacious goal, written and understood by our employees, and that goal drives our people forward. That is part of strategy, folks. It's also a people one. We'll talk about that, because people actually care about where they're going. Most of them don't want to go along for the ride. Most of you did not do as well on that one, from what I saw as I glanced through the results. And then this one was the real kicker. We gather feedback on an ongoing basis from our customers and employees to improve the company. The answers are sometimes in the building, but a lot of times they're out there. And if you're not spending time in a systematic way collecting data and information from your customers, you are going to lose. I guarantee it. Yes, sir.
Sorry to interrupt, but
No, good.
it's a hot point for us currently. So how do you handle that? I mean, to go out to your customers.
We're going to talk about that. You are right on point, sir. All right, we'll talk about that. Great. Write it down, make sure I do it. All right, so those are your strategy questions. The next 2, and again, you're going to have to like jiggle a little bit because they're not in order, is we have the right people in the right seats. This is obvious, right? That's a people question. Right people doing with the key accountabilities and targets defined for success in their job. And everybody in your organization, if I were to walk through your companies, everybody would be able to tell me how they got an A. That's the number 1 question. I know what is expected of me in my job. All right, so this is another obvious one. For us, 2 to 3 months core capital. And I don't mean a line of credit, because what's the problem with a line of credit? It also can get taken away. Yeah, that. Which we saw back in 2008. I've lived through 3 recessions. Yeah, that is not a line of credit. That is core capital. That is off the book. It's off someplace. Maybe it's in PPR note fund, getting 10%. It's someplace, right? And then finally, the last 4 are execution. We have plenty of time to plan and spend time planning because we do so little firefighting. We review our most important metrics on a daily and weekly. You're going to hear this time and again. Daily and weekly to make sure things are running on time and on target. We have a written business plan. Written, not in my head or on a scrap of paper. This was another one that you didn't score as high on. We have a written business plan that we use to help direct our activities. And we regularly accomplish most of what we set out to accomplish. So this was interesting because as I was reading through these, you guys scored high on the last one. We regularly set out what we say to accomplish, and I'm like, crap. If they actually had plans and they actually monitored those plans, I imagine what you could accomplish if you're regularly setting out and getting the things done that you're trying to get done. Why does that daily and weekly thing keep showing up? What do we know about human beings? Pardon?
We're creatures of habit.
Well, we're creatures of habit, right? Eileen could give you a whole lecture on habit. Yes, and so putting habits in place like weekly level 10 meetings, right, is really critical. What else do we know about human beings? My husband actually works as the director of organizational effectiveness at the University of Pennsylvania at the Medical College. And he's dangerous. He's also dangerous when it comes to human behavior. What do we know about human beings? Are we pressure prompted or are we early starting? Meaning we like to start early.
Pressure prompted.
We are pressure prompted. 80% of human beings are pressure prompted. And months and years and quarters don't mean anything. You want to give it to them in days and weeks. I need this from you in 2 days. I need this to you next week. And if you're going to go into next week, I want to say May 4th, Wednesday. If you want human beings to do a little bit more of what you need them to do, work with them, right? If I had a 4-cylinder car and I had a Jaguar right next to it, or a Lamborghini, who would win? I can't expect a 4-cylinder car to do like what the Jaguar, what the Lamborghini's going to do, right? The performance cars. It's not going to happen. But you all keep pretending that human beings are like robots, and they're not. Leverage what we know, right? The reason that these KPIs are weekly and daily and should be looked at weekly and daily is because that's how human beings are operating. And the reason that we want to write things down is because, again, when it's written down, it does something funky in the brain. Yeah, Marcia's like, yes! So take advantage of human beings and how they operate. So as you look at these, where is your short leg? Where did you score the lowest? What's your biggest? Where's your Achilles heel? Yep, 4 minutes. Thanks.
Mine was execution.
Execution. Yep, the nemesis. That's why there's 4 questions in execution. Execution. That's why Gino has EOS and traction, right? Because execution is the biggest issue for a lot of small companies. So how many people scored low in strategy? You're not really happy. You got like 2s, 3s, 4s. No? Yeah, maybe. How many scored lower in people? Yeah, there's. How many scored lower? A lot of you have cash reserves. Doesn't seem to be a big issue. Did anybody score low in cash reserves? Yeah? Okay, thank you for your honesty. And then everybody else is execution? Where did you guys score low? Oh, you were a people. You guys were people. What were you all?
KPIs.
KPIs. Yeah, putting the measurements in place. How about you all? Execution. Joseph, how about you?
KPIs.
KPIs again. How about you all?
Execution.
Execution. You guys are execution? And execution? Yeah.
Just a quick question.
Yeah. Yes.
I feel like KPIs don't work anymore in way of metrics and measurements, and everything I'm reading about is moving away from KPIs in regards to motivation for people. What's your perspective?
So it's a good question. When you say KPIs, you're specifically talking about what? Key performance indicators for the company to show company health, key performance indicators for individuals, right? Individual scorecard. Let's talk about that, all right? And that's another good one because I think KPIs have been misused, honestly. But you know, there's a lot of people that actually like to know how they want to know the score. And how you go about giving them a score becomes really, really critical. So that's a great, tell me your name. Karen, thanks Karen. That's a good question. Okay. So this is the other one, right? Where's our short leg? And then where are we doing okay? Where do we maybe not have to worry as much? 2 minutes? Oh, good. So as you can see here, like on this one, right, obviously the strategy ended up being a high point with 5s and 4s. Can you see? Okay. And then we've got short legs down here, and we've got short legs in execution. And again, I'm also I'll tell you what your number 1 is, but I also want to know what that number 2 is. So I have a tendency to do sort of a 1-2 punch when you're thinking about your company priorities, which we're going to be doing in a little bit. All right, let's do a minute. Takeaways. So Karen, what's one of your takeaways from this last little bit on an assessment?
We have a lot of opportunity.
Yay! Good job. I'm gonna run down this back row. What's one thing that you all have heard in the last 20 minutes?
Well, just the assessment in general, just don't putting it in ranking order of where we could have some improvement areas was insightful.
Lovely. Good job. How about you all?
Same type of thing. Putting everything down, putting a number next to everything, kind of was a little bit more eye-opening, and realizing where we need to kind of work on things, and that you have the same answers as a table. At least we're on the same pages.
Yeah, it's good, right?
So,
At least we agree with where we are.
so it's good that we're at least on that same page and what we have to work on.
Yeah, great. Lovely. And you guys, what's one takeaway?
I mean, for me, I don't have a written quote-unquote business plan, so I'm not quite, I mean, we have strategic priorities for the year, the quarter.
And they're written down someplace.
They are written down.
Okay, so they're written.
That's considered.
That's a positive. That's a step in the right direction. Business plan doesn't have to be
I'm
60.
gonna raise my score then.
Business plan is not 65 pages. That's one of the things, right? It's like 1 page.
So for me, the
Keep it
takeaway
simple.
is we do ask for reviews from all our customers, and we get some feedback, but we could probably be more targeted about
How
actually
you're doing it.
surveying for opportunities for
Yeah.
improvement.
Yeah, that's probably one of the biggest issues that I find is we just don't spend enough time really talking to the market and understanding. And that's why we're going to be doing what we're going to do this week. So, good. Any ads? We're good? Okay, just keep it
Oh,
moving.
I do have one ad, actually. It's a resource that I find with execution to support Charlotte's idea of days and weeks have more meaning. There's actually a website, workingdays.us, for the teams that I work with. I always have them every meeting. They go on that and they put in the date where they're at and the end of the quarter, and it gives them the number of working days left in the quarter. So every week we say we have X number of working days left in the quarter, because we always think we have weeks, and then we think of weekends, like 7 days. It's not. It's like actual working days, less holidays, etc. There's something meaningful about how many days do we have left?
Yeah.
Oh, we only have 8 days. That's different than 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It's psychologically different, so it might be helpful to experiment with that.
Yeah, the most important thing you can do to create a sense of urgency. Hey dear, we have you over here. We saved a seat, Carla. This is Carla, CEO of Electrosoft. Yay! She's going to be sharing a little bit of her story as well. All right, I'm putting, you have to keep the volume down over here because they're like talking a lot. All right, So let's talk about people and get into some of those. So I'm just trying to remember here. Let me do this so I don't lose track, because it was Steve, right? Tony next to Tony. Steve? Oh, no. What's your name? No. Ian. Okay, so Ian had the strategy question. Karen had the KPI question. Where was the other question that didn't want to keep me off track? I thought there was a. Is that it? Was just it? Okay, I'm keeping my parking lot to help keep me focused. All right, so let's talk about one of my favorite subjects, people. How many of you actually went into business to work with human beings? Oh, there are some. You're just a little off the beaten path, right? Most of the folks that all right, we have a couple over here too, right? Most folks that I know didn't necessarily go in to business to work with people. Dave's like shaking his head. So here are the key people questions. So there are three pieces that we want to make sure that you're pulling together for each of the decisions. The first is, how do I measure success in this area? And I already told you very early on that the KPI, the key performance indicator that we're looking at for the people decision, is what? Starts with an E. Engagement. Thank you. As measured in our world by the Gallup Q12. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Then there are some questions to ask yourself to know how robust you are in this situation, right? So the exercise that we do that we don't have enough time for today is I would have you write down all the names of the people on your team. Write it down. And then I would have you look at that list and say, would you enthusiastically rehire everybody on that list? And the corollary to that question is, if all the people on your team came to you tomorrow and said, Rod, it's been lovely working with you. I really appreciate the opportunity, but I've just taken another job. Would you be jumping up and down? Or would you be fighting to keep them? You don't, in a small business, I worked at Procter & Gamble, I've done work for GE, I've done work for J&J. You don't want, we had tens of thousands of people in those companies. We don't have tens of thousands of people in most small companies. We have 25, we have 100, maybe 500. I just talked to somebody yesterday, they have 1,200. You need them all pulling in the same direction, and that you need them to at least be B players. I'm going to say that again. You need them to be at least B players. You don't need all A's, but you need to have B's. Does everybody understand what's expected of them? Getting back to what I said earlier, if I went to everybody in the organization and said, what's expected of you, they'd be able to tell me how they know they won. Was it a good day? Was it a bad day? Based on what? And Karen, that gets back to that outcomes. They don't necessarily have to have a key performance indicator, but they have to know how they're winning. And then, of course, the infamous, can you find enough of the right people? Which is the big one, right? So that may be a people. In fact, I don't know any company that today, any of the ones that we work with, that isn't focused on people as at least a number one or number two priority. They're doing something in the talent arena. You have to, because the landscape is changing. So this is in your handouts. You can go on Gallup. You can Google Gallup Q12. You need to know the scorecard. So just like we had the 4D assessment, which is sort of the overarching company assessment in the people arena, Gallup has put together a checklist based on decades of research. And if you're a data nerd, like some of the people I work with, you can go read the appendix of that book. There's a lot of information in there. But that basically what they found is that you want to get scores of 4s and 5s. So this is a five scoring scorecard as well, with strongly agree being a 5 and 1 being strongly disagree. And you want to get 4s and 5s. If you want to have an engaged organization, you want to get 4s and 5s. There is a ton of data that says high engagement scores means better customer service. I just talked to somebody yesterday. They have 200% turnover. It's a 1,200 person, $200 million company. They have 200% turnover, and they're wondering why their recruiting costs are high. I'm just like, this is not rocket science, people, right? And they haven't done anything. They have this amazing organization, but they've done nothing in the people area. They're not doing anything around measuring engagement. They're not even measuring. They weren't even measuring turnover. I don't know how you get to 200 million and you don't measure turnover, but right? But what we love about Gallup is it gives you the things to do, right? And the amazing thing about the Gallup, the top 5, right here, these are considered base camp. So you can just don't even pay attention to the bottom part of the list if you don't want to, if it's like too overwhelming. Just look at these top 5. Does everybody know what's expected of them at work? Do they have the tools to do their jobs? Or are you asking them to like nail nails in with like a screwdriver? At work, do they have the opportunity 50% or more of the time? Not all the time, 50%, half the time. At work, do they have the opportunity to do what they do best every day? Have they received some form of positive recognition in the last 7 days? It doesn't have to be from you. It could just be from somebody else. And again, we have some resources on this. And then finally, somebody cares about me. We know from the data, we know from how human beings are wired that human beings need 4 things in order to follow a leader. They need to know that they can trust you. So the more transparent you can be with them, the better off. They need to know that somebody cares about them. That's how human beings are wired. We are tribal. We are social creatures. Even if they want to be remote 100% of the time, they still want to know you care. So they need to, again, they want to trust you. They want to know someone cares about them. They need stability. That's why the last 2 years have been hard. That's why there's so many teenagers out there that are having mental illness problems. Like, human beings need stability. And it's your job as a leader to create as much stability as you can possibly, even in the midst of chaos. And finally, human beings need to have some type of hope or meaning. Remember Viktor Frankl? Right? Human beings are meaning making. We need to have some. That's why that vision question, that's why I was concerned for you all when I saw that most of you didn't seem to not have visions or BHAGs or people want that. And it's not just the millennials and the Gen Zs, right? People need that. Those are the 4 things. And again, we've got resources for that one too. This is your scorecard as a leader, and the tool that we're going to do today in the next 10, 15 minutes, I'm still doing okay, is the functional accountability chart. So this is one of the basic tools in the people section. I think it's in chapter 4, which is the leader chapter. Yeah, in Scaling Up. There's actually a process accountability chart. But the exercise that we like to do in the functional accountability chart is for you to look at your functions. And this is, we're starting with Gallup at the very beginning. Do we know what's expected of these positions? So you will see in here that I actually gave you a starting point with some of the positions that are here. If you have different positions, different functional positions, like maybe you have different locations, maybe you have division heads, I don't know how you're set up. What I would like you to do is just do this first one. Name the person, put the person's name in this column who is accountable in your organization for that function. So just put the person who is accountable for that function. Don't worry about the KPIs right now. I mean, if you've done the exercise before, you can certainly go that way. But I have a second one. I have a corollary exercise. Take a minute. And again, this is an individual exercise, and then we're going to talk amongst ourselves. And just write down the person who is accountable at first glance for that function.
Can't be multiple.
And well, you can look at the questions at the bottom, right? That there's an answer. There's if you look at the questions at the bottom of the page. Thank you, Rod. You're not really supposed to have two people accountable, because if two people are accountable, nobody's accountable, right? We know this. It would also be good not to have one person's name in multiple boxes. And it would be good to have names in a box. All right, so here's the second question for you. I love this guy. He's like this. So Darius, so for those of you that are sort of struggling in the people area, one of our people resources is the core value equation, which was written by one of my alums, my CEO think tank alums. Darius Mershezada was the founder and former CEO of the Money Source. They grew it from 300 people to over 1,000 people back in 2015. Crazy, crazy, crazy growth. He is he's a little like a bull in a china shop, is the best way to describe him. But he is rabid about having strong culture and having a strong foundation. And one of the things that he did was he took the functional accountability chart and he sort of turned it on its head. And so I wanted to share this sort of idea with you, which is putting that person in that seat, right? Who's accountable for that function? And then the second question is, why does that function exist in your company? And that's the conversation I really want you to have. Why does that function exist? What is the purpose of that function for your business? Because IT with PPR Note looks different than IT for Capstone, looks different than IT for Delaware Valley Family Business, right? So this company, it's actually a real company. I just changed the names, right? Thought it was sort of humorous to put Dolly Parton down as in charge of IT. The reason that this IT function exists in this company is to manage business continuity, disaster recovery, and cybersecurity, because they've got data that cannot be breached. And they also have a lot of vendor relationships with outsourced development teams. So that's why IT exists in this business. Versus in my business, the IT function exists just to keep me up and running, and so that I don't have downtime. It's that simple. Same thing with like the sales function. Like you could just have a sales function for this business that establishes sales targets and generates revenue. That's it. Or you could have a business, I'm looking back at Eileen in her previous lifetime, where you had a sales function that was accountable for going out and finding new and finding new markets and penetrating existing clients, in addition to just setting the targets and generating revenue. So that's what I want you to have a conversation about, 5 or 6 minutes, is who's in that seat currently, and why does that seat exist in order to make your company successful? What is the overall purpose of that function for you? Okay, 5 or 6 minutes. Talk amongst yourselves. Are you in agreement? Yeah, like at this particular juncture in our growth, what do we need out of this function? If you can keep it as much as possible to what do we need from this function, or this position, take the human side out initially. And that's like very much by the way, a Michael Gerber. Like functional accountability chart comes out of Michael Gerber's E-Myth. If anybody's familiar with the E-Myth stuff, like that's where this comes from. So if you want to dig into that more, I think Gerber's done the E-Myth like 10 times in different variations. Yeah, that's good. That's good. What about you all? What was the takeaway here?
Trouble finding a specific name on each.
Yeah.
It's mostly at least 2 people.
It's 2 people, right? Back to what Rod was. Yeah, yeah. Which, and you know, there are some roles in here, as Eileen was pointing out to me, like sometimes human resources, because some human resources is more sort of compliancy, payroll-y. Like I'm looking at the human, like it's more the sort of legal part of HR, and then there's the talent and learning. It requires 2 different competencies, sets of competencies. Like the person who would do the best job with talent development and learning is not the person who's going to keep you out of the courts, right? Yes! Marcia, you want to stand up and cheer. Right? So it's what is the competency that is required for that position? That's the 3rd step. There's 3 steps here, folks. It's who's in that position currently, right? We have to know who's in the position. The second is, why does this position exist? Which starts to get to the KPIs. And the third is, does that person that's in that position currently have the right competencies and skills to do the job? Or the desire, quite frankly. Right? That's the other issue. All right, how about you all? What's the takeaway here?
We definitely had,
You had the 2 in 1.
The same name in too many blocks,
Mm-hmm.
or several blocks. And
Yep.
we had the problem.
Have you sent that person on vacation recently? Who is that person? Mark's like me. There you go.
And then we had multiple names and multiple blocks,
yeah.
you know. And I'll just say from, like, and we just had this conversation, like, our company's definitely been growing the last few years, and we brought Rod on staff about 5 years ago to grow sales as a sales manager without any thought process at all, because once we grow sales,
Then what happens?
what did all these other
Exactly.
things that we were all kind of doing and sharing and that sort of thing, and now it's kind of blown up, and it's the struggle, mental struggle to find out, like, oh, geez, are we ready to hire somebody for that? What can we serve? You know?
Yeah. One of our clients, they're right down the road from they're up north, they're that way. AWE, they make like the things that make cars louder, basically. That's what they do. They do high performance stuff for the cars. And again, just like puzzles, what else are you going to do in the middle of a lockdown than work in your garage and put stuff on your car? So their marketing and sales went crazy during COVID. And their manufacturing facility, they had to grow from 35 people to over 80 people in the course of 6 months. Well, you can imagine that didn't work, right? They're still like recovering from COVID, but on the upside, right? And so what about you all?
Similar to what Mark and Ron said, but also too many priorities.
Too many priorities again. Yeah, we can't do everything. There's a great video that I didn't put in the resources called the 20-Mile March that I love. It comes out of Jim Collins' book, Great by Choice. And it's all about the power of setting reasonable goals. 15 to 20 miles a day, not like going crazy and trying to go really crazy when you can and backing off when you can't. It's like step by step by step by step by step. And that's really the power, is because small business people are notoriously optimistic. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in a small business. They're notoriously optimistic about what they can get done in a year, in a very short time frame. You're actually a little more conservative when it comes to longer term. So that's one of the reasons I like small businesses to actually have a 3-year goal, because you're a little bit more realistic for whatever reason. Again, it's how the brain works. So just one other additional point. I know I'm going to run over by a minute. I'm looking at Eileen. Here's the most important role for those. How many CEOs, general managers are we have in the room? Raise your hands. Right? This is the non-negotiable. A CEO has 3 roles. And it doesn't, like, you can read across the board. As the CEO, you are accountable for driving the strategic direction of your organization. You are the one who sets strategy. You're the one who's out talking to people. You're the one who's trying to understand what the market is saying. That is a CEO's role. The second most important part of a CEO's role is making sure that the right people are in the right seats. That's it. If you do nothing else as a CEO, get the right people. Spend your time. Back to AWE. That is what Todd Sager, the CEO, has been doing for the past year. He has been trying to make sure that he had the right people in the right seats, doing the right thing. Dave Van Horn, same thing. He's trying to replace himself. He'll tell you that after break. Marsha O'Connor just changed her org chart, her org structure, because you went from 50 to 85, 90 people? 85! Right? Strategy, right people, right seats. And if you have a little bit more bandwidth, the third thing that a CEO is accountable for is communicating the vision of the organization to the rest of the company. Again, people are looking for hope. People are looking for stability. People want to know that their organization has some future. And you're going to engage them much better if you communicate that effectively. So that's the non-negotiable. So again, back to your WWW. What's the one thing that you need to do coming out of this people exercise? What is it? Who's going to do it? By when? One thing. Terry, you got this, Terry? All right. Let's talk strategy. So again, the 2 questions on the assessment that related to people were these. We have the right people in the right seats with key accountabilities defined. That's why we did that exercise, so that everybody understands how they're going to get an A. And then the one that we didn't really dig into was core values, because core values is an important part, having that clear culture to attract, hire, and engage our employees, and have created a solid virtual bench of candidates. You should always have a bench. You should always have a bench. Just like you have a pipeline in sales. Who are the salespeople in the group? Rod. Do you have a pipeline?
For business, yes.
Yes. Do you have a pipeline? You need to have a pipeline of candidates, folks. Check out Darius's, the webinar is up on the website underneath Learn. There's a Learn tab on CEO Think Tank's website. Check it out. It's really very, very, very solid stuff. Core values is the area that you need to work on. So let's talk about strategy. So here's your strategy questions. Does anybody remember? Here's the pop quiz. Does anybody remember in the strategy section what that KPI was that I've said like 3 times now? How do you know whether or not your strategy is solid? Revenue. What kind of revenue? Consistent. Gross profit. Thank you. Financials are the, what does Crabtree say? The number 2 weakness of entrepreneurial companies is financial accounting. It is a big problem. Yes, top line, real top line, your gross profit, consistent, predictable, sustainable. That's what we want. So the question you want to be asking yourself is, where are you trying to go, and are your gross margin dollars going to get you there? Is it predictable and sustainable? And this is a Crabtree question. Do you have something that people want and are willing to pay for? Because people want a lot of stuff, but they're not always willing to pay for it. And the question that we like to ask is what we call the strategy litmus test. So what is the compelling and relevant value? Why are people buying from you? And typically it revolves around some type of pain point. Even if they don't know they have a pain point, right? Like what Amazon did. Like, oh, I can just click and I can have anything at my doorstep in 10 hours, right? How does your strategy provide relevant and compelling value to your customers and address a pain point? So Ian, we're starting to get to your thing. And does our strategy meaningfully differentiate you from other people that are doing the same thing? Those are your two key questions, right? So I'm going to tell you a bit of a story. So at the last recession, everybody knows the Philly Fanatic, right? I'm assuming. So Dave Raymond, who now runs the fund department, was one of our early clients. He was actually one of our early scaling up clients way back when. And he was the original Philly Fanatic way back when. You still remember, right? And he had a company at the time, the fund department, that sold mascots. And when we first started to work with him, this was back in like 07, 08, and he saw, Dave was amazing at predicting stuff. He saw the recession was starting to come, and he was starting to get nervous because mascots, buying mascots, most of his customers were like minor league teams. They were schools, right? They were universities. He had about 200 of them. They didn't have big budgets. And he just saw it. He was like, you know what's going to happen? These mascots are really expensive. We have a recession that's coming, and they're not going to buy. And we're going to be out of luck. And so we said, you know what, Dave? Why don't we take oh, you know what? I didn't get that one. So there's another lovely book. I'm going to jump ahead for a minute. There's another lovely book called Roar, How to Get Heard in the Sales and Marketing Jungle. And so we pulled a leaf or a couple leaves out of Kevin's book. And he's probably one of the best best marketing guys that I know. And we said, Dave, we need you to go and talk to your customers. Not email. Not survey. I'm looking at you guys. Pick up the phone and talk to them. Say, hey, you know, I just want to check in with you. This happened to be at the end of December, so it was perfect timing. He said, I just want to check in with you. You know, we've been working with you for a while. I'm just really curious. Can I get 15 or 20 minutes on the phone with you to talk about how we're doing? And most of them actually said yes. I have a couple of questions that I want to ask you. What do you value about what we do? Oh, you do a great job of like servicing us. Well, that's interesting. What do you mean by servicing? So in order to do this, in order to have this conversation, you have to put your Sherlock Holmes hat on. Be curious, or Curious George, whichever one you want to pick. Why do you value what we do? What is the problem that we solve for you? They may not be able to tell you on the first go around. You're going to have to be curious, right? And get that data. What's the one thing that we don't do for you that you would like us to do? Not everything, just one thing. What's the one thing that we're not doing? What are we doing better than our competitors? What's the one or two things that enables us to do better? And what's our competition doing? What's one thing? You keep noticing there's a pattern here. One thing, one thing, one thing. Human beings do better when you ask them for one thing, not a bunch. What's the one thing our competition does that we don't do that you value? And why? Right? You're digging for the why. You're digging for the pain point. We actually have another tool, a strategy arrow, that one of our CEOs created that you can put all this into something. And so that's what Dave did. Actually, Dave is highly, highly competitive. One of the most competitive people I know. I'm just going to put that up. And he said, I'm going to have a 30-day challenge, Cheryl Beth. I'm going to go out and talk to 30 customers in 30 days to find the data to this. I get a call about halfway through January. He said, I'm at 20. I've already talked to 20. I'm like, oh, it's only the 15th of the month and you're already at 20. He said, and it's unbelievable what I found out. I said, what happened? He said, well, the first thing I found out was that they really, really do like, and he had a competitor that was in New York that like, they sort of split the market. He said, well, the first thing I found out is they really do like our mascots. Like we make really solid mascots. They're really high quality, which he knew. Because that's what they did. They made mascots for people. He said, but you know what I found out? I was like, no, what? He said, what they really value about what we do is that we help them to be a better mascot. He said, so much so that they asked me, a couple of them said, you know, it would be really good if you actually did some type of mascot training about how to be a better mascot. And the third thing I found out was that we've actually helped some of them actually generate revenue because people get attached to mascots and then they want to buy mascot stuff. But he said, you know, the best thing? I said, what? He said, I sold 3 gigs at the same time. Because, of course, it was Dave. So they launched Mascot Boot Camp. And you can still do Mascot Boot Camp in order to learn how to be a better mascot. And so even though people weren't buying mascots during the recession, because that was too expensive, they could end up doing Mascot Boot Camp. And so that's why we want you to get out and talk to people and make your own list, right? How many customer contacts are you making every week? Not to sell. You're talking to them. You're asking them how they're doing. How's the market, right? And are you taking that data and pulling it together, right? It's only data until you pull it together and look at it, and then it's information. The top 2 or 3 reasons, this says 5. Oh, it says top 3. Top 2 or 3 reasons that people are buying from you. Why do people buy from you versus your competition? That's considered your value prop or your brand promise. How many of you have called up a customer just to talk in the last 2 weeks? The salespeople, obviously. Dave, right? How many of you call them up and say, I've got a problem, would you be able to help me? That's why I gave Carla the little gift, is because Carla has been, we'll talk about that opportunity later. She's been helping me with stuff. And most importantly, just like we've been doing here in these conversations, are you sitting down at least once a week, once a month, and asking your employees and your team, what have we learned from the market this week? You have got to be doing this, folks. There is so much crap going out in the market. If you are not sitting down and having this conversation, something is going to broadside you. I guarantee it. I mean, Crabtree told me at least once a quarter you should be doing this. Eileen and I chatted about it yesterday, and she's like monthly. There's a lot of stuff out there, and they're going to tell you about stuff that you're not going to hear. So here's the exercise. What I'd like you to do, again, and there is a sheet in your handout. Right after the functional accountability chart, it says strategy, brand promise, because that's where we're going with this one. We got to know where we are. We got to know why people are buying first. Think about your customers. So think about this 30-day challenge that Mr. Raymond did. Who are your top customers? Who would be 5, 10, 20 customers that you could reach out to? So again, here it is, April 27th. In the month of May, there's a song about that. In the month of May, who are the top 5 or 10 customers? And you can talk about why they would be good customers, right? That's the question that's at the top there, is list the qualities that you describe in your customer. That you could just reach out to and say, hey, Ian, I really need to talk with you. Like, could you give me 15 or 20 minutes? We just went to this workshop and we were assigned homework. I am happy to be thrown under the bus. And just ask them these questions. Nothing complicated, right? What's the biggest problem we solve for you? Why is that a problem? Why is what we're doing of value to you? What's one thing that we're not doing for you? What's one or two things that we do better than our competitors? And what's the one thing our competition is doing that we don't do that you find valuable? Just ask those questions. 5. That's all I'm asking you. There's 5 weeks in May this year, if you count the 31st. Find 5 customers. So talk amongst yourself, figure out 5 customers, 10 customers, 20 customers. Who are those customers? And then we'll talk about what you're going to do with the data when you're done. So this is the capture, right? This is the capture opportunity. So on this is a whole, by the way, strategy, to quote Mr. Collins, is not a flip chart exercise. You can't just go off for an hour. Blah, blah. Strategy is an iterative process. There's a great story, because Starbucks was one of Collins's early clients back in like the 90s, and they were trying to come up with their big, hairy, audacious goal. I think Howard Schultz actually talks about this in his book, maybe. Anyway, and I think they said they wanted to have like 2,000 stores by 2000. That was their sort of big, hairy, audacious goal. And Collins sent them home and said, no, that's not big, that's not hairy, that's not audacious. So they took like another 6 or 12 months or something, and they came back and they said, we want to be the #1 brand in the world by 2010. Do you think they're one of the #1 brands in the world? They're pretty damn close. Who was the #1 brand back in the 90s? Anybody know? It's another beverage. Coke! Oh, look at that, you knew. Yes. Yes, that's what we mean by big, hairy, and audacious, right? So this is what you're trying to get to, right? You're trying to get, starting with you as the team, right? What does your core customer count on? What did you hear in these conversations? What do they expect from you?
What's the difference between what they count on and
Ah, that is a good question. How would you define it?
advantages versus baseline, maybe?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'll pick on another CEO think tank, Nielsen Kellerman. They've grown, they do all sorts of interesting stuff, but their basic technology, they started off in the rowing industry. You know Nielsen Kellerman, right? They've gone from 10 million to 50 million. They're on their way to 100. Their customers count on them. Their stuff has to work, no matter what. If you're out being a sniper, doing ballistics, if you're out on the river doing rowing, if you're down and they've gone down to Antarctica and stuff with folks, their stuff has to work, absolutely positively. What do they expect? They expect data. They expect customer service that responds. They expect to be able to have things replaced if they don't work. So yeah, it's like, what do they absolutely positively need? Because what does that do when you understand what they really count on? It creates stickiness, right? People come back to CEO Think Tank. We have so many alums because they count on us to continue to keep them educated. We are here to teach our companies how to fish. We are not here to fish for you. We are here to give you the growth curriculum and the resources and the tools to grow your companies so that you can go off and do whatever it is that you're supposed to do in this world and make the impact. I truly believe that entrepreneurs are the most amazing people in the world. Small business is where it's at. You all are making the difference. You're the ones who are employing people. You're the ones who are standing up, and as opposed to people like Elon Musk. Right? You're making a difference in the world, and if we can teach you how to fish, then that's wonderful. I think it's the best thing that we have alums. I love having alums. That's what they count on. They count on us to give them the curriculum and the resource. And then most important, how are you different or unique? What are you doing that's different in the marketplace? Because then you're in that position, right? A good strategy, I'm looking at Ian. I think it's, I'm thinking it was General Electric, I'm thinking it was Jack Welch, but maybe somebody else, who said a good strategy, good positioning, means that you are saying no to a customer, to a potential customer, 20 times versus saying yes. You are turning down more work. Sally knows this. I talk to 20 to 30 CEOs. We only end up with one working with us. That's it. Because most of them don't want the discipline. Most of them don't want the rubber chicken. And you're going to hear from one of those CEOs after we take a break. Right? So this is where we're trying to go with this, and then ultimately you can take that down into brand promise and KPIs and all that type of stuff, which is in the Scaling Up book. But in the last minute, let me just do a popcorn style, and then we're going to take a break. Can I pop back here? What's one of your takeaways from this customer strategy conversation?
We just we don't do it, right? That's like the biggest one. But we all agree that there's like a lot that we can learn, and we don't have all the answers.
Mm-hmm. No,
Right?
the answers are outside the building.
Right? We could guess. We think we have a good idea.
Yes.
But we'll probably find.
And you could have a hypothesis, like put down your hypothesis, like, well, we think this is what they're going to say, just like Dave. Dave was shocked that they liked the training. Like, he's like, I can't believe it, because he was so enamored of the costume. And it was like, oh, but they really like the training. How about other takeaways? Popcorn. Yes, sir.
Just that we don't do it, at least we're not focused on doing it. I mean, we do it, it's not formal.
Systematically, yes.
But it could help us focus if we had that information.
Yep, absolutely. And it saves you time, because then you're not wasting your time with people that
Doing a
don't.
lot of things that people don't care about.
Exactly. That's how you get your time back. How about this side of the room? A couple takeaways. Yes, sir.
I thought the gross margin dollar growth rate as a measure of your strategic effectiveness.
That's it.
Interesting. I hadn't really kind of
Put it together.
looked at it through that kind
It's all about your gross profit. Actually, it's really about your EBIT, your cash flow, but yes, gross profit, gross profit. Other takeaways? Yes, sir.
We actually just went through this, but the reason we were going through it is that our resources are so scarce
Yeah.
now, just with price increases, everything happening, that
Yep.
It's really important is like who is a good customer and
Yeah.
why. Like,
Why?
do you like doing business?
Yes. 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 And you know how to.
Organization, because people have to interact with them too, and it can tie up resources if it's frustrating to deal with the customer. They don't want to adapt to your operation.
Yeah.
It's a two-way street.
Well, and that can be motivating for people. Like CTN Solutions, so Drew Morris Rose, CEO, they were an early CEO think tank person, scaling up, all that type of stuff. He actually would reward his sales team and his customer service team every year, because they got to nominate a customer to be fired on a yearly basis. So every year at the end, they would say, who's the one that we just don't want to deal with?
They follow through with it?
They did. I had that going for like 2 or 3 years. Yeah. Yeah, we're at time, right? Okay, so let's do this. Again, take your WWW, write down what you are going to do. Where did my WW? I lost it. As a follow-up to this, the who, what, and when. I mean, this for me would be the most important thing next to talent. Please, please, please go talk to your folks. Go talk to your customers. Get some information about why they're buying from you. It is going to help you be a much better company. And it's going to, back to Rod's comment, it's also going to save you time, right? And then let's take 20 minutes. So if you can come back at 10:23, 10:24, and we will get into the final 2 decisions. I went to Lehigh, and so we used to, in my youth, there were things called beer bongs. Do you know about those? So we always joke that it's not just a fire hose, it's like the beer bong of business learning. when you sit through scaling up. There's so much information. Okay. Oh, wait, I wanted to go back. Hold on. So back to our assessment. We're grounding in our assessment, right? We talked about strategy. We talked about people. Now we're going to dig into cash and execution. And so this is about spending time on the important, not just the urgent, as Stephen Covey would say, right? Having the time to plan, having ways of measuring where I am on the field. That actually comes from my work with Ron Jaworski. So we started working with Jaworski Golf when they were only about 300 people, 300 clubs, back in 2012. And Liz, who is Ron's wife, I absolutely adore. And she was like, we need this whole thing. So, but Ron was the one who used to always say, when anybody comes in, no matter who it was, if they were in food and beverage, if they were on the golf courses, if they were part of the service crew, if they were out on the grounds, when an employee walks through the door in the morning, I want them to know where they are on the field. I want them to know if they're on the 20-yard line. I want to know if they're on the 50-yard line. I want to know if they just need to get a foot to get a goal. Like, I want my folks to know where they are on the football field. That was his biggest thing. And that's what execution is all about. You got to know where you are, and you got to know, what do I need to do to get to the end zone, right? Written business plan, regularly accomplish what we set out to accomplish. That's our measuring stick. So here's some of the key performance indicators in the execution arena to be thinking about. And this is part of the morning that's going to be the most work, because you're really going to have to dig into your priorities. So have you increased revenue, but your profitability has dropped? Again, I think some of you are talking about capacity issues earlier. I already told you about the black hole of profitability that hits companies that Crabtree talks about. That is a real problem. If you're just growing and you're not paying attention to your profitability and managing your expenses, you can fall into the black hole. Are you spending more hours working, not less, as the company has scaled? And do you have a lot of drama and little in the way of the results, right? Is it always urgent, 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 firefight, 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 and we don't ever carve out the time? I was just having this conversation with Joseph. Sally, his homework is he and Kevin need to get together and carve out an hour to talk about this.
More than an hour.
All right, so that's what good execution is all about. And again, so one of the most important pieces about good execution is knowing where you are, which is why we spent time getting aligned around the assessment and where you are and where you need to focus. Having those clear priorities. What were the two other disciplines of execution that I mentioned way back when, about 3 hours ago? For those of you taking copious notes, having clear priorities, 2 or 3. Knowing when you're going to get it done by, right? That's why I keep saying who, what, and when. And that's part of your KPIs. That's part of your metrics, is we're going to do this by this date. And then the third piece is having some type of speed bump in place to stop you, so you're actually spending the time looking, how did we do? Did we make it across the end zone? Did we get the first down, right? Or did we lose yardage on that play, right? Human beings are really good at seeing patterns, and we actually are pretty good at looking back and learning lessons if we allow the time to do that. But in the hecticness of day-to-day, we don't often take the time to reflect back. So the first step is having a good goal, having a solid statement of what we're trying to accomplish. Now, many of you may be familiar with SMART goals, right? This is like not rocket science. This has like been around forever, right? I need to have something that's specific. What am I going to do? I need to have something that's measurable. I need to have something that's achievable, right? I'm not going to try and climb Mount Everest. I'm going to go out and get a walk, get 20 minutes today. It makes sense within your job function. This is why we did the FACE exercise earlier, right? Like, why does this function exist in your company? Because they'll remain nameless. We have been some folks that have gone off and they've hired a technology person and they didn't really have a job for the person because they hadn't really said why the job exists. What is this job supposed to do, right? And then finally, time bound, right? Days and weeks. So one of the things that we found is it sort of helps to break it down when you're doing goal setting. So there's 3 key areas. The first is what kind of result are we trying to get? Right? Well, you might be trying to get the result of predictable flow of recurring revenue and X number of repeat customers if you're in the sales position. You might want to have a consistent number, I don't know, 20 a month, of qualified leads to support your growth goals. You might want to have 80% A players in critical roles and 90% retention. Again, start with the end in mind. Where do I want to go? What is the goal? What do I want to do? What do I want to accomplish in the people area, in the strategy area? I want to go talk to 20 customers in the second quarter. That's it. I want to reach out and talk to 20 customers, right? What's that end game? What's that result? And then, well, how am I going to do that? I'm sorry. Let me back up to focus, right? I want to focus myself because, Sunhai, there's a whole bunch of ways that I could go about getting to 80% A players, right? And 90% retention. And transitioning the CEO role, right? So so PPR note said, we're going to go out and hire an executive search firm with certain criteria, right? In order to identify and hire a new CEO. And Dave gave you some of his criteria. And then finally, this is the key piece. Eileen really taught me this piece, which is by what, with what, through what. Because it's not enough to say, well, I'm going to go off and hire a new CEO by July 1st of 2022. I have to have some steps, right? I have to have the how. So getting in touch with what are those 2 or 3 things that I need to do in order to get to this result. So if I'm trying to improve my customer satisfaction and referrals, because I haven't done a very good job, like the company I was talking to yesterday that's had 200% turnover and they've lost a bunch of customers. They want to improve their customer satisfaction and referrals by developing and implementing, in their case, it's a strong account management system. He said they don't really have one. And if they went off and they developed and implemented, develop, implement, you'll notice a lot of verbs here. This is in English. This is an 8th grade English lesson too, right? Develop and implement a strong account management system. The result would be a predictable flow of recurring revenue and X amount of repeat customers, and they'd make everybody happy, right? That's what we're trying to do. So it's a 3-parter. Same thing here, right? If I'm trying to get to qualified leads to support my growth goals, I need to create a strategy to get there using multiple channel partners. That's actually one of the things that PPR Note did. They hooked up with Bigger Pockets way back when, right? And that got the word out. That's one of the ways that they made their initial foray, is they actually started with one channel partner and did a lot of branding. I mean, one of Dave's early investments, other than me, but I'm cost effective, and CEO Think Tank, was he went out and found the right marketing partner. And then they hooked you up with Bigger Pockets, right? That's what happened, right? So, and then all of a sudden they're awash in money. And then finally, for those of you who have a people issue, I want to develop and implement a talent management and development process. And in our case, using Gallup best practices, top grading, that will result in 80%. Now, how long do you think, I have annual priority up here. How long do you think some of these might take? Realistically, with everything else on your plate. I'm looking at Joseph. It could be 18 months, right? These actually, some of this, like, honestly, this robust marketing strategy, that's probably more like a 2 to 3 year, right? This one, maybe not so much, right? But we can't, like, how do you get all that done, right? Well, you got to start breaking it down. And that's why we have these quarterly goals, because we say it's a 3-year plan, 90 days at a time. So that's what we're trying to get to. We're trying to say, what is that result? What do I need to do in the people area? And so this is the questions. Here's the homework. Here's what we're going to be doing in about 2 minutes. What is the result I'm trying to get to in the people area? What is the result that I'm trying to get into in the strategy area? To just start there. Or cash, if cash is short leg. What is the result? I'm just going to try and have meetings, regular meetings, if that's your execution issue, right? For Ian and his table, like, it might just be, I'm going to get back on the horse, right? And start looking at the plan on a regular basis, because I know what the right answer is. I just need to get my level 10s back up off the ground and have checkpoints. Doesn't have to be complicated. Is there another one that I missed? I think that those were the key, right? People, strategy, execution. And again, what is the result I'm trying to get? Eileen has a really great slide that I didn't have time for, where she has the recipe for a brownie mix that she shares. And if you're trying to make brownies, the recipe is going to be slightly different than if you're like trying to make creme brulee. But it starts with knowing what you're trying to make. Okay. We have the baker, actually, Keisha. Right? So what is the outcome that I want to try and accomplish? We basically have May, June, plus 6, 7, 8. It's not quite 9 months to make a baby. It's 8 months left we have 8 months left in the year. Between now and December 31st, what are the 2 or 3 results that you want to get in the people, strategy, execution, and cash area? And how might you go about getting there based on what we just talked about? I don't need the whole plan. I just need the next step. So I'm going to go out and talk to 20 customers, and I'm going to analyze the data. I'm going to sit down with my management team and look at my functional accountability chart and try and figure out what people are accountable for. I'm going to identify the blanks in my people chart. I'm going to start doing my level 10 meetings and then schedule a quarterly meeting.
I'm getting the hint that you want us to start doing our level 10.
I'm just picking. You gave it. It was so lovely that you gave that to me. All right. So it is 10:44. I want you to take 10 minutes on this one. 10 minutes to talk about what has trickled up as 1 or 2 key results, maybe 3 if you want to be aggressive, that you want to try and accomplish, and what might you start to do in order to get there in the next 9 weeks that's left in the quarter and 8 months that's left in the year. So again, we've talked about strategy. We've talked about people. We haven't talked about cash. And we've talked about execution. Let us dig into cash just a little bit. So this is going to be the shortest part. I'm probably going to only spend about 15 or 16 minutes on this. So if you can keep me to like 10:30, 10:32 or something. Oh, 11:30. I'm behind. Okay. So I said earlier that financial accounting is like the short leg. The number 2 weakness of growth firms is in the finance area. Anybody want to guess what the number 1 weakness of growth firms is typically in? It's actually marketing. Because most entrepreneurs are very, very good at selling. They're not so good at marketing. Because they're natural salespeople. but they forget that there's this other piece. But this is really for us, because again, cash is like oxygen, right? If we don't have oxygen, we die. So we start off with the question that's on the assessment. Do you have cash reserve of 2 to 3 months? By the way, if you are in a cyclical industry, like marketing, like staffing, like something like goes up and down, it's more like 6 months. Jim Collins would tell you need a year. And as we said earlier, a line of credit is not core capital because lines of credit can get taken away. They're lovely to have, but the bank can turn around and take it from you. Are you able to predict your cash flow 2 to 3 months out? So you know what's coming. You understand your business well enough. And again, getting back to, are you in a cyclical industry? And therefore, you're going to have a little bit of extra cushion, or you're going to have to do what PPR Note did, which is they diversified. And Dave has been like the king of diversification from the beginning. Because what happens in your industry, right? Because initially they were looking at seconds, right? Second mortgages, because that was the issue. But then the seconds went away.
Strongly tied to the economy.
Strongly tied to the economy, which is why they're also a little bit worried, right? So these are some of the things to think about. And in your Scaling Up book, there are 7 different cash tools that Scaling Up talks about. The first is your cash conversion cycle, which is really taking a look at how long it takes from when you put money out to do marketing or to do sales or to pay a person to when that money comes back into your pocket. And there's an exercise that you can do if like trying to speed up your cash conversion cycle, you could do that exercise. There's another exercise around labor efficiency ratios and Mr. Crabtree's stuff. Again, you can listen to the webinar, you can get some information there. The biggest cost in most businesses that aren't in the manufacturing sector is what? What's the biggest cost for most businesses, particularly if you're servicey? People, labor. And we do not do a good job of tracking labor. And so Crabtree came up with a model where you use labor efficiency ratios and you separate it out. And you're very, very deliberate about how you're capturing direct labor versus the support labor. So if that's something that you're trying to do, I'd highly recommend you check him out. For our purposes today, I wanted to, and I said at the beginning I was going to make you an offer. So here's your offer, is something called the Power of One. So one of the things I've really appreciated about Vern is that I have been exposed to so many guest thought leaders and so many tools and so many resources. I cannot imagine what my life would have been like over the last 15 years without having Scaling Up in my life. And one of those people, even when I don't like the medicine I'm being given, and I say that because I hate finance. I absolutely, this is my short leg. I actually, just because I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to do this, I actually printed out, you'll see, I've been just talking off the cuff. Here's all my cash notes. Dave knows. He and I have had many lunches over this one, right? But Alan Mills came along, and he's Australian, and so as you look at the cash tool that's in your handouts, you will notice that there's some funky British terms. So it says things like, it's this one, right, this green one. It says things like stock days. Anybody want to know what stock days? It's inventory, but it's only if you're in the United Kingdom or Australia or New Zealand, or Canada maybe, right? Anybody want to know what debtors days is? Receivables. And what about the other one at the bottom? Right? Creditors days, payables, right? So that's the little translation. And Alan came up with this amazing tool called the Power of One. And he has an instrument called Cash Flow Story that we have access to. And so you can take the last 3 to 4 years of your fiscals, your financials, not just your P&L, your balance sheet numbers, right? The dirty little secret that nobody, how many people look at their P&L once a day? Amazing.
You know
I know you do. I love Marcia. All right, how many of you look at your P&L once a week? Oh, there we go. There we go. How many of you are looking at your P&L once a month? How many of you are looking at your P&L less than that? The rest of you, right? How many of you are looking at your balance sheet once a day? You're looking at the cash number. Yeah, okay, good. How many once a week are you looking at your balance sheet? Thank you. Once a month? Once a quarter? Never. Yeah, I know. Yeah, well, that's helpful, right? Yeah, it's all important. The issue is that both of these are important. And so if we can get 3 to 4 years worth of your P&L and balance sheet data, we can put it into this format that you're seeing here, and we can tell you which of the 7 levers is your lever, or 2 levers maybe, if you really want to try and improve your cash flow. Because what we know about cash is that there are 7 levers that you can push on if you want to improve. But the problem is you can't push on them independently. Because if you if you increase your price, which generates theoretically more cash, right? What else happens? You increase your price, what could happen? You could lose the volume, right? Because people won't pay, right? So there's this back and forth thing. If I increase my volume, what could suffer? Profitability, maybe. Capacity, right? There's these like little hidden costs. Cost of goods. If I decrease my cost of goods, because that's another way to increase. If I decrease my cost of goods, who's in manufacturing? Do we have any manufacturers in the room? What happens when you decrease your cost of goods sometimes? You get poor quality, right? I remember that from my Procter & Gamble days. We could tell when we switched vendors because they wanted a cheaper vendor. As soon as you put that poly on the machine, it like blew up. Just annoyed the crap out of us. Damn people in Cincinnati. AR. What happens when you start clamping down on AR and try and receive sooner? Pardon? You could lose customers again, right? Or you might be working with Amazon and you can't, right?
Yeah.
There's that, right? Or Walmart or somebody like that, right? So each of these levers, right? We can increase price, we can increase volume, we can decrease our cost of goods, we can decrease our accounts receivable, get the money in faster. We can increase our accounts payable, right? And extend out. What happened to inventory in the last couple months? You guys have been investing, right? It's been blowing up. Oh, it just drives me freaking crazy, right? It's horrible. We have major inventory supply chain problems going on right now. And Shanghai is still locked down. And then overhead, just basic SG&A, right? If we can reduce that. So these are your 7 levers. And as I said, they show up on your P&L as well as your balance sheet. And trying to get a handle on what that lever will do can be a little bit complicated. And that's why we use cash flow story, because you can have a conversation if you've got the right financial assistance. So I don't know if this is something that Kreischer Miller can help you with, right? Where they can actually help look at stuff and say, well, if we do, right, these are the things that you can do, right? However, my offer to you is that if you want, you have to let me know today. We could run a cash flow story analysis for you sometime over the next month or 2. And we can review it with you to give you. So that is my offer to you, but you need to let me know so that we can make time to do it. But let me just give you an example of what it looks like. So this is how 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 19. Real math. I'm sorry? What?
I thought you said you were good at math, not finance.
Right? So if you just look at those 7 levers and say, well, how are we going to tweak them? Only by 1%. It doesn't have to be a whole bunch, right? We're only going to increase sales. I'm looking at the sales per. This is good because I get Rod to like keep looking at, right? Only by 1% gives me $100,000 on 10 million, right? If I decrease my cost of goods by 1%, that's $50,000. And if I decrease my G&A, again, there's always room in the G&A. I'm looking at Steve. There's always money you can find in your G&A. Right? That's 40. And what does that do to my net income? So I just found $190,000. What is that by month? 15? Is it 15 a month? Over a 12-month period? It's about, right? About 15. So there's 15K just by doing that. And that is the power of 1. And this is an exercise that we highly, highly, highly encourage our folks to do at least once a year, to really look at their cash flow, to understand what their levers are. The other lovely thing about Cash Flow Story is it will give you an approximate valuation, and you can play with stuff. You can go in and you can play with the levers to see what ends up happening. So these are the 7 levers, and then it'll tell you if I increase by 1%, this is what happens. If I decrease by 1%, this is how much money, and it'll make recommendations to you. But in the meantime, I would, and again, because price increases, right, were the big thing, right? How many people have raised prices? Yeah, if you haven't raised prices, Crabtree said, right, it's gonna help you understand what your EBIT, right, your EBIT is as well. So again, not every cash lever will produce results. You can work with people like Kreischer Miller who can help you like sort of dig into this. And then my offer to you is that if you want us to run a cash flow story for you, we will do that, but you need to let me know today. Give me your card, sign up on the evaluation, all that type of stuff. So let me just do a quick takeaway to make sure I was clear, since this is my short leg. What's one takeaway that you've heard about cash? Cash being like oxygen.
You definitely need that. I mean, it's important. You need to have more on hand.
You need to have, right? It gives you oxygen. It gives you the ability to pivot, right? The reason you want to have cash is it gives you the ability to pivot and make different decisions. And when you're hit with black swan events, it gives you a little bit more runway. I mean, the interesting thing about this last COVID thing is because PPP kicked in, and most people were able to access PPP, it sort of, I said it sort of pulled the veil across, and so people thought that they were okay because they got this government check. But the reality was their businesses actually weren't really that solid. And there would have been a heck of a lot more companies that would have gone out of business if the government hadn't infused that money. What other? Pardon?
That was the whole point of it.
Yeah, no, right, exactly, right. Unprecedented times, right? Yep. Yeah, and I'm not going to argue with it. And at the same time, I think it caused some people, like, because I've lived through 3 recessions now, I remember the last one with 08-09. People were much more coming out of 08-09 with a much better understanding of, crap, I got to do something different. Not everybody's coming out of this one thinking I got to do something different.
Completely different from 08, 09.
Yeah. What about you guys? What's your takeaway?
Knowing which lever to pull.
Pardon?
Knowing which, like the importance. of
Which
pulling
lever to pull?
The right lever.
Yeah, and who do you work with from a financial standpoint?
Myself. And
Yeah, having the right if you have nobody, like, have the right financial partner. I cannot tell you, like, I'm happy to introduce you to people. You've got people in this room. Have the right financial partner. That is a critical seat. And not someone who's just looking to save you money on your taxes. I'm not talking about tax management. I'm talking about financial management. Right? That's what we need. Takeaways?
That's a reminder of the relationships of how influencing different levers influence different things.
Mm-hmm.
Especially to the relationship between the P&L and the balance sheet.
Yeah.
Really understanding that is critical.
Yeah. Well,
Especially for your management team, especially for your management team too. Like
yes.
you actually have control over.
Yeah. Well, and just even educating your management team on how to read a balance sheet. I mean, I think the biggest travesty in business, one of the reasons I'm how many people are like Jack Stack, Great Game of Business fans? Yeah, I adore Jack Stack. Like, he was an early idol of mine, because he took this like bankrupt manufacturing facility and turned it around into like a, what is he now, $3 billion company. It's crazy. And just educating people on your if you were to only do one thing in the finance area, like other than like maybe taking me up on my offer of doing the 7 levers, educate your people on finance. Teach them how to read a balance sheet. Teach them about P&Ls. Not only will it help make them better employees, but it will make them better human beings, and they'll be able to take care of their families better, right? So it's too many people don't know how to read these things, and they get scared by the numbers. So if that's like your one thing, just do that one thing. What about you guys in the back? What's the takeaway here on cash?
I think along with what everybody else is saying, you know, just understanding your cash, the need, what you need for opportunities, and planning per se. So I would say pretty much whatever.
Yeah, ditto. Okay. Okay. Well, and again, this was not a short leg for most of you, right? So when we did the assessment, it wasn't necessarily a short leg. It wasn't the one that was the lowest scoring. But having something on your plan that's cash related, that's money related, I think is still critical. So that's what I'm going to push for. So again, getting back to, and as I was sharing with these guys, there is in your handouts an abbreviated one-page plan. So there's like a more scary one-page strategic plan that is in chapter 7 of Scaling Up, and there's an abbreviated. We call this, at CEO Think Tank, we call this the Marshall Plan, because Carla designated it that way. Because one of our members says, I'm just going to keep it simple. And so the lovely thing about the vision summary is it allows you to put some of your strategy elements in, like what are your core values, what's your core purpose, which we haven't talked about, and that brand promise. It allows you to put those key priorities that we were just working on. And just do me a favor, cross out 5. Nobody can do 5 years. Just 3. Like, just look ahead for 3. Putting your 3-year in, thinking about what that BHAG is. If you don't like BHAGs, cross that out and put vision. Like, what am I trying to accomplish? Right? Where am I trying to, where do I want to be? And it can't be revenue oriented. It's about lives impacted, right? It's about people served, because people can't get excited about revenue. That is not going to give people meaning. It's about making an impact. And then you'll notice at the bottom of this little one-page plan, what is at the bottom? Right there. What does it say?
Critical people.
Yeah, but what does that say?
My name.
Your name. So that's your plan, right? So you can have everybody in the organization will have one of these, or everybody on your management team will have one of these, and you can put them on their cubicle or put them up on their computer. However you want to make sure that everybody knows what everybody else is doing. That could be one of your homework items coming away from this. It's just filling out the Marshall Plan. Yes, ma'am?
To the lowest level, or just management team? Like how far do you think it's important for everybody?
Yeah, ultimately, yes. But you know, you want to start with yourself first, right? So as the management team goes, so goes the rest of the organization, right? Experiment on yourself first, right? I mean, we always say that the executive team needs to be the focus for the first 6 months. Until, you know, practice. And you can have people hold you accountable. You can say, oh, by the way, we're working on this. We want to be fully transparent. We'll answer your questions. If you see us not doing these things, tell us. You know, all that type of stuff. It's a good question, Karen. So let's just do a little bit of a recap. I think that's it, right? So I think we've talked a little bit about the 4 critical decisions. We talked way back when about the barriers to growth. Did I leave that there with you? Yes. As I mentioned to a couple of people, in your resources, right, the last couple of pages of this handout are some resources for you. You can check them out. Right here, there's this resources page. On the second page, you'll notice it says other resources, and there's a link to the 7 stages of growth, which I've been sharing with some of you in my lovely hard copy, where you can actually find, this is a crystal ball. So if you're struggling with setting priorities based on your stage of growth, you can actually look this up and it will maybe help you to focus a little bit more so that you can address these barriers. Does anybody remember? Quick pop quiz. What are the 3 barriers to growth that we talked about way back when at 8 o'clock? Lack of leadership. Lack of scalable infrastructure. And market dynamics. You guys are good. Oh my heaven. What a great group, Sally. Right? And then also being introduced. So before we sort of get to I wanted to have Carla say a few words as a family business person about her scaling up experience, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Thank you.
I wrote things down. So my background is actually in supply chain. I have nothing to do with my family business, which is electronics manufacturing. My father's an engineer and computer science master's degree, builds products for the military and industrial companies, and I was like, ooh, manufacturing's dirty, it's not my thing. I went to school and majored in business logistics and worked in supply chain for major companies for a number of years. And it was during that time that I got married and started a family, and I had a very difficult pregnancy and started an online business. And that business ran concurrent with my family business, and I became a student of search engine optimization and inbound marketing, and just really learned so much about it that my company grew exponentially, and I learned this amazing thing called equity in a business. And I also learned that there's higher margins in electronics than in retail. And so I made the decision that I was going to go and work with my family business and implement a lot of the tools that I had learned to grow my company so that my family company could grow as well. And so my father and I started working together, and he's like, yeah, I think I'm going to retire in 3 years. And I said, okay. So we started having family meetings and whatnot. 3 years turned into 11. But during that time period, I became so focused on taking over the company that I felt like I was trying to more so, I wanted to be CEO more than I wanted to do CEO. So I started doing CEO type of activities in the company. So the first thing I did is I went back to school and finished the MBA that I had started and never finished. And then I really learned about mergers and acquisitions. And through that, executed our first acquisition using my own playbook. Like, I wrote all of the documentation. I mean, I think I paid maybe $8,000 in lawyer fees at the end of it. And said, I think we really have something going here that we can move forward with. So then I met Mike Pearson, who did not get a chance to meet, and he introduced me to Alex James because she was another woman who took over her family business, and it was in manufacturing. And after talking to Alex, she's like, she needs Cheryl Beth. And I was like, who is this Cheryl Beth person? introduced me to her today. And so within a week, Cheryl Beth and I met, and I really loved the concept. I mean, I've had a book, I had the Rockefeller Habits.
Yeah,
That
you had
was
the
what I was
Rockefeller
given.
Habits.
And then she mentioned Scaling Up, which I went through, and I went to my father at the time, and I said, I need to be a part of the CEO think tank. And he was like, for what? I didn't need any help to get where I'm at. Why do you need help? And I said, you're right, you're amazing, and you can do all things, but me, the difference is that neither one of us have taken a family business from the first generation to the second. And then from that point on, we've not scaled that company from that second generation. And that is why we need someone like Cheryl Beth. So there's many options to pick when you're doing scaling up, and I chose the group approach with other CEOs, and in that group were also other family businesses. And
Second gen, a lot of second, we have a lot of second gen.
And in that process, I didn't feel crazy anymore, which I think when you're with your family sometimes in business and you have conversations and they carry on from like family to business to family, and you start to feel a little crazy, and it made, and I don't have friends that have family businesses. If they do, they don't have siblings. And so it becomes this whole different thing. I didn't feel alienated anymore. And I used the group to bounce my ideas off of, and it was actually fun to leave the office for a half a day once a month and go through and talk to other people, and again, not feel crazy, because a lot of times you're doing this all by yourself. What I loved about it was the systemic approach to growing a business. So there's a difference for my type of company in manufacturing between scaling and growth. So when you scale a company, you think of software companies where there's a direct relationship with asset input and growth, okay? So I'm sorry, with manufacturing, asset input and growth. So if I get more orders, I have to get more people, and that's how we grow in tandem. If I had a software company, I have my upfront costs, but then the cost of servers, as it increases, like the scaling shoots up like a hockey stick, because you just don't need as much of an input on that side in order to grow exponentially. But what you can do with scaling a company with manufacturing is that you take elements from scaling and you put it into that growth model so that you are in a growth trajectory but faster than everyone else. So that was my goal. My goal was to grow the company using scaling techniques. And so like I said, 11 years later, I wound up taking over, and then COVID hit, okay? And then
Right when you bought the company?
like the receipt was still in my pocket when COVID hit. And
Carla has impeccable timing.
and if you don't know, and I'll ask you, maybe you do know, can you tell me what the percentage of black businesses that failed during COVID was? Any idea? Take a while back. It was 41%. 41% failed, and one of the reasons, obviously, was the big reason was the not having a banking relationship, so that when PPP came in, that they could go after that money, which was designed to help a lot of small minority-owned businesses, and they were not able to get that. With my connection,
She did not help everyone because it wasn't
designed.
not delivered well.
So it was because of the buyout process, it wasn't I was able to make relationships with 7 different banks at the time, because I wanted to have my own banking relationship separate and distinct from my father's relationship with the bank, which was tremendous in helping along that process. So my timing did get better as far as when I executed on things. But the folks in CEO Think Tank were like, oh, here's this bank president. Like, they had the numbers of bank presidents and VPs in their phone, and was like, call Carla. She's going to buy your family business, and she needs a lot of money. And it was just so helpful to have that. And I didn't have that, and I didn't have that within my relationship sphere. So, as you know, privately held businesses, we make emotional decisions with our business that they don't, if we had private equity money, would not be allowed to make. Like, we keep people in COVID, because we care about the people that work for us. We don't furlough them, we make these emotional decisions. And so that obviously has a, lever effect on cash and cash flow. And, but I had core cash. That's the other thing that helped me through COVID. I had a ton of core cash that if I needed it, even my bank was like, oh, you know, you don't have to pay us for like 3 months. I was like, really? Okay. And then I didn't pay them for it. I was like, why did I not pay them? I have money. And so I paid them and kept it going. So data exists for companies, public companies. So when you go to school and you learn about all these businesses, and this is what businesses do, and this is what they're great, and all this other stuff. It's mostly for publicly held companies because that information has to be reported, and that's why we know so much about them. If we were to take our companies and pair it up to that, it's just going to be so many differences, and there's no true way to get that information outside of doing a whole lot of reading or using an operating system like scaling up.
And being part of a community that's willing to share. So, I mean, that's obviously something that this community can do as well.
Yeah. The private companies, we don't have to share. Someone's like, you know, what were your sales numbers? And like, why do you care? Like, you know, you don't have to share. So, couple of things that I love about these things, the scaling up, is the tools. The tools are incredible. When I said to Cheryl Beth, okay, I read this book, I need a list of all the things that I need to do. Like, if I check off all these things, will I then have scaled up? And she's like, well, here's the list. And it was like,
doesn't quite work that way.
so many things that I needed to have in place. And I looked at it that even though we have a 35-year-old manufacturing company, if you go in and you look back at the foundation, did we do exactly every single thing we needed to do in order to have a strong foundation for this business? No, because we were entrepreneurial. We were just throwing this thing together and trying to survive and make money. But now we're moving from entrepreneurial to professional, and that was very, very different. And so one of my favorite tools is I live and die by the cash flow story. That's like my favorite thing. I feel like it's Christmas every time we do it. And I'm like, did you do it yet? Did you finish? Here are my numbers. And she sends me, she's like, oh, well, we want to look through the report. I'm like, just send it to me. Just send it to me. I want to look at it myself. I'm a numbers person. And I do pay attention to the Power of One, and I do attach KPIs to it for my staff so that they know, like, look, we got to fix this AR, we got to get this together. And so certain people know what they have to do in order to make our numbers better. The education piece of the live speakers that come in, and we do like a major big event twice a year, and a lot of folks come. And then we have people that come to our smaller group sessions. The coaching, the one-on-one coaching part with Cheryl Beth, who she knows intimate details, not just of my business, but of my life. And it really helps because I swear, as business owners, we need therapy. I mean, it's just so hard sometimes to go through, like, being married, having children, being a part of your community, and running the business, and if you go back to school, and you can sometimes feel torn in different ways. And what Cheryl Beth is able to provide you is a pulse on, you know, are you doing too much? Maybe you should talk to this person, maybe you should talk to that person, and it's a safe space. The accountability of the group, like Chelsea and I, we probably sit next to each other too much at these meetings. You put us next to one another. But it's like when we need to work on something, I don't have to reinvent the wheel. Oftentimes I'll go to anyone in the group. I've known Marsha, you don't count because I've known you since I was 18 years old.
Yeah,
and I interned at Arthur Anderson and you hired me. But when I was, but I can go to anybody in that group and know that they will take like cherished, like collateral that they spent money on and say, oh, here, go ahead, take it, use it, do whatever you need to do with it. And it, as it relates to scaling up or any other thing. And then I've kept on track. I sit on multiple boards. I do an advisory board for another business. I have 2 teenagers. I am married. My husband's an attorney, so he's useless when it comes to that. And so I don't have a lot. I mean, I have people, I have help that helps me. You know, I hired help, but I don't have enough hired help to get my life together. So, but when I think about what's important, I help these folks keep me focused. She helps me stay focused, and I'm able to accomplish things. You know, we talked about execution being extremely important. I have high execution skills. I've taken it to a totally different level through this program. So I guess I'll just say in the last note, originally I was going to keep this company small because my dad's like, you know, let's keep this our legacy and you can pass it on to your children. And I said, yeah, I have to do that. He created a business that feeds his grandchildren. I need my business to feed my grandchildren. And then I went to the Strategic Growth Forum. I don't know if anyone's ever been there, the EY Strategic Growth Forum, in Palm Desert in November, and I spoke to their family business office. And they were like, yeah, your family's gonna rip your company apart. Best thing to do is you need $50 million and you need to create a family office, and that's gonna give you the legacy that you're talking about. And I was like, I guess I make $50 million. I said to Cheryl Beth, change the plan. Let's scrap that one-page strategic plan. We're going to 100 million. And so, in that, I also met some amazing strategic partners, and that's like the fluidity of scaling up. But you can say, look, I had an epiphany, and this is what I'm going to do with my company now. This is where we're going. And her job is not to say, oh no, you said legacy company. I go, oh no, she doesn't do that. She goes, okay, let's go, let's do it. And we revamped the plan and are headed in that direction. And
Created an advisory board.
This
woman created an advisory board in 4 weeks. It was pretty amazing.
Well, when I was at the SGF, I met Phyllis Newhouse. If you've not heard of her, please look her up. She's the first black woman to take a company public via SPAC last year. And she is tremendous. She's in cybersecurity. She worked for Colin Powell. She's amazing. And she says, Carla, you remind me of myself. Here's what you need to do. And she pulls out a pen, she takes my book, and she's like, you need a board, you need these people, and then you need this. And she's like, and my friend Viola Davis said this, and blah, blah, blah. And then, and Serena Williams and I get together. And she's just so connected. And she's like, I'm going to introduce you to this person and that person, but the first thing you need to do is create an advisory board. So when are you going to have that done, dear? And I was like, by June? She's like, I'll give you 90 days. So I took the roles that she gave me and I put together this advisory board, and in within that 90-day period had it. Within Q1 had my first advisory board meeting. And I had Cheryl Beth, you have to admit, that board is insane. Really amazing people.
Get people to help you.
Yes. And so now I just feel like I'm on this different trajectory. I have the tools that I need. And I'm not trying to just figure out we're doing 100 million. That sounds crazy, but like they say, if your dreams don't scare you, they're not big enough.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing. Yay. Thank you, dear. So here's my challenge to you all. I don't care if you take what we've learned today and do one thing. I would love for you to visit the website and download some of the tools and put a plan together, at least for the next 8 weeks that you've got left in the quarter. There's all sorts of self-help tools basically on the website that you can download. But what Carla is helping me to do is, in the fall, we are launching up Scaling Up Philly. This is actually something that we tried to launch in early 19, and then we had to push it off, and then, of course, COVID hit. And part of our outreach is not just to work with small mid-market companies, but it's also to try and get some of those black and brown companies and women-owned businesses to be part. So if you want more information on that, reach out to me. In there, because we would love more involvement, and Henry has already said he's willing to help, which I'm very grateful for, so thank you. There is an evaluation. I want your feedback. So if you can please take a few minutes to just fill this out, and then I'm going to go around the room, and I want to ask you what your takeaway is. What is the most valuable takeaway from this morning that you've learned that you will actually implement, you will do something with?